Section 27 of The Soul, or Rational Psychology. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Soul, or Rational Psychology, by Emanuel, Swedenborg. Translated by Frank Sewall. 1837 to 1915, and others. Section 27. Chapter 16, Part 1, of Concerning the Formation of the Rational Mind and Concerning its Affections. 307. We have treated of the affections of the animus, and before treating of the affections of the rational mind, which is, as it were, midway and like a center of influx, we ought to treat of the affections or loves of the pure or superior mind. But to treat at once of the loves of the supreme mind would be to fly from the lowest to the highest, and from sensible things to those which do not come under our intellectual comprehension, and which do not admit of being described by adequate terms. But those things which are met with in the rational mind fall under the comprehension of the intellect because they are ours. These also would by no means come under the comprehension of our intellect unless there were a purer intellect or a sublimer mind which flowed in, and from which we were able to view those things which are in the rational mind as if beneath. 308. But since it has been said above that the rational mind is intermediate between the pure mind, or that of the soul, and the impure inferior mind, or that of the body, that is, the animus, it seems to follow that the rational mind possesses no affection proper to itself, or of itself. For it is the center of influxes, or that in which are concentrated two essences. It cannot be said to be other than the common essence of the two, or one nature composed of both. This is also most true. But this composition, or mixture, is an essence by itself, whose nature differs from both according to the mixture. But whether and in what sense it can be called an essence proper, this remains to be seen hereafter. Some preliminary consideration is, however, necessary here. 309. This is sufficiently clear from experience and from reflection that our rational mind desires or is possessed of desires. Desires cannot exist without affections or loves. For what we desire, this we love, and what we love, we desire according to the degree of the love. These desires in the rational mind are called cupidities in the animus, which cannot be given without bodily affections or loves. This also is clear, that we are able to choose that which is best and to reject the bad, or that our rational mind is able to judge freely and to act in accordance with its judgments. If the loves themselves did not belong to the rational mind, but only flowed in from elsewhere and forced this mind to judging and to acting, then nothing of its own, and therefore nothing free, could be predicated of the mind. But this free choice itself demonstrates that the rational mind is intermediate between the loves which flow in, and is the umpire in the election of the best. This also is clear, that there would be no will unless there belonged to the mind some affections, one of which it might will rather than another, but there would be either cupidity or instinct in the place of will, as in brute animals. For all that is cupidity which is from the animus, and all that is instinct which flows down from the superior mind. 310. These things clearly indicate that those loves which are insinuated into the rational mind are so united that they are distinct as to essence and nature from the loves of the superior mind and from those of the animus, and thus that they constitute a certain proper, as it were, separate mind, but still such an one that as it exists from both, so it subsists through both, and depends upon both, not indeed equally, but just as it bends and inclines itself more to the one than to the other. To the aforesaid arguments this also may be added, that we never could be blamed for any fault or crime if there were no love existing in the mind as proper to it, or as most emphatically our own. For we acknowledge nothing as our own, and properly pertaining to us except what exists in our rational mind, for that mind is the most verily mine. Ipsissimum meum. Other things are mine as far as that mind calls them its own. Nor does it consider them otherwise than as its own instruments, by which it is able to be what it is and to do as it wills. Which is also the reason why we say that any one is what he is according to the state of his mind. The weak and dull and impotent of mind we hardly call a man, but the most intelligent and wise we call the true man, and divine. Thus the proprium of all that is in him is of the mind. 311. But if we regard the matter more deeply, and attempt to explore what is proper to the rational mind and what is not, for what pertains to the mind and is in it, this is said to be proper to it, but still it is not therefore truly proper as sight is to the eye, which is truly proper to the internal sensory, since this sees without the eyes, while the eye does not see without the internal sensory. Strictly speaking, I see nothing as proper to this whole internal sensory or human intellectory, except that its mind may bend or turn itself to the superior mind, or that of the soul, and admit its loves that they may flow in or receive them, in what manner shall be told elsewhere, or else to the lower mind or that of the body, that is, of the animus, and permit its loves to flow in or receive them. All other things whatever are not proper to this intellectory, except as by flowing in this way. For the rational mind is as the standard which holds the balance. In the human body there is nothing except soul and body, or nothing except the spiritual and the natural. The other things which are intermediate participate of both, and so far as they participate, they, like the scales, depend upon both. That therefore each may be held in equilibrium, the rational mind is provided to be the moderator and governor, and thus in this point solely active, but in others passive. It is commonly received as a truth, because common experience teaches it to everyone, that so far as our rational mind admits loves which flow in from the body and its blood, or from the world through the gates of the senses, and applies itself to these, giving and surrendering itself to them, so far it is removed from the loves of the superior mind or from spiritual loves. And so far as it removes itself from the loves of the body and the blandishments of the world, so far it admits the loves of the superior or spiritual mind. The spiritual is, as it were, suffocated by the natural, and the natural is exterminated by the spiritual. Thus it appears that there is an internal man which fights with a certain external man, and the mind itself perceives the battle, and either gives up, conquered, or else carries off the victory. 313. Since, therefore, the loves of the superior mind and the loves of the animus of themselves and freely flow into and flow together in the rational mind, and since it is the property of this latter only to bend itself in one direction or the other, we see how that the other things which are in the rational or the properly human mind flow thence, so that it may be said of them that they are proper to it. For whatever things flow from that which is proper, or from the will is necessarily constitutive, these are also proper and derive their name and power from their source. But let us proceed in order, and by means of examples. 1. The first love, will, and as it were, desire, of the pure mind or soul, is that of associating to itself a lower mind or animus, which it produces or creates from its own essence and into which it inspires life. That is, the soul forms, and indeed out of its own essences, the pure intellectory, whose mind is natural. And this mind is in the pure intellectory, and in each one most particularly. The common essence and life of these particulars is called the animus, in which therefore there is only the natural and the bodily, but not the spiritual, although it descends from the spiritual and is created from it. But this love is not yet that of the rational mind, but that of the pure or spiritual mind. 2. The spiritual mind, already associated with the natural mind, now loves and desires nothing except what is common to both. The spiritual mind loves its own natural mind, and the natural mind respects and venerates its own spiritual mind, and yearns with the highest delights that it may depend upon this and may be subject to this. Hence now flows the first love common to both, namely, to form the organs and instruments by which it may so act and operate. As love and desire give and take in common, these organs are formed most conveniently for the nature and the love of each. For either mind regards those ends only, and because these cannot be attained except by organs and instrumental means, hence these instrumental means are formed with a view to every end common to both. Thence arises that corporeal machine, which is merely organic, exactly according to the image of the operation of either mind. But neither is this yet the love of the rational mind. 3. This delicate body being formed and put forth from the maternal egg or womb, at once there succeeds or is born, as it were, or unfolded from the former, another love, which is the love that it may become a man, or that it may be furnished with a certain proper mind, which may be called rational. For man derives his quality of manhood from his rational mind, since such as that mind is, such is the man. Then the pure mind or soul does its part, and the mind of the pure intellectuary does its own, that is, the spiritual mind and the natural mind. And because each pursues a common cause, and desires to pour into this mind its essence, nature, and life, it follows that this mind is called rational. For the rational signifies the spiritual and the natural together, or mutually participating. 4. He who loves an end loves also the means conducing to that end. Each mind provides the means when it shapes the organs whereby to attain its end. Therefore common to both is the first mediate love, or love of the means, which is that the organs may perceive, as for instance that the ear may hear and the eye see, or the common sensory or the brain perceive those things which are heard and seen. For this is the first way or first means of forming the rational mind, and in forming it. Whatever there is harmonious, this is pleasing. This gladdens the animus. And whatever is inharmonious is unpleasant and grieves the animus. So the animus is now first excited, and so concurs as if of itself in producing this rational mind. Still the rational mind is not as yet any more than in its cradle or in its first infancy, for it only begins to be in that it is able to bend and turn its sensorial organs and to imbibe objects as they flow in. This is the one thing, as said above, that is proper to it, and to which it is incited by the mind, which is affected pleasantly, joyously, and delightfully by harmonies. Now its golden age begins, innocent, smiling, because the animus has not yet risen up against the mind, but loves it inmostly. For the mind is in the animus itself, and both conspire to one end, and the animus is thus far ignorant of what the world outside is. 5. This common love progresses always farther and grows in progressing. Already material ideas are insinuated in the common sensory, and in the internal sensory, immaterial ideas or first principles of the intellect, not from any proper love of the rational mind, but from the love common to both the animus and the spiritual mind. For the rational mind itself is thus far ignorant whence such love comes, as it flows in as much from the mind as from the animus. The mind desires the end, the animus the effect, and it is ignorant of the end of the soul, but is excited by the pleasure which flows from the harmony of the internal and external sensations. The rational mind itself does not as yet contribute anything more from itself than that it applies itself, turns and attends to what flows in from both sources. For when it attends, its attention only is required. 6. The ideas of the memory and the imagination being thus increased, man begins to understand or to perceive something beyond, or to draw some essence or higher sense from words, which are all material ideas. When the intellect begins to form, it also thinks. And thus there is further progress, and at once from the things of thought into the will, not indeed from any intellect, but from the love of a certain pleasure, which is insinuated by the senses into the animus, and by the animus into this intellect. 7. These delights of the animus which are communicated to the rational mind appear as though they were in the mind and were felt therein. But they are outside of this mind itself, for whatever appears delightful, pleasurable, and joyous to the animus appears and is called good in the rational mind, but contrary things evil. The goods and evils themselves are all these objects of love, or those things by which the animus is affected. Then the rational mind, curious to know whether this be good or evil which appears pleasant and lovable, is therefore carried on by a kind of desire, to wishing to find out whether it be a true good or a false good, that is, an evil, as also whether it be a real evil or an apparent evil. For the knowledge of the true signifies nothing in itself without the good, since what is true ought to regard the good as its subject. The rational mind does not stand still here, for it cannot be persuaded whether a thing be truly good unless it finds out the subject of the good. For there is no good without its subject. This subject at first appears, but to know whether it be truly good, it is necessary to inquire as to the quality of this subject, what are its attributes, accidents, and adjuncts. And at length these being explored, it may be persuaded whether this good be truly good or not. Thus the rational mind proceeds in particulars that it may explore the nature of things placed before it by which it seems to be affected. Such appears to be the intellect of the rational mind, the which if we inwardly examine we shall clearly perceive that all these affections are not proper to the intellect, but that there flows in from above some love of knowing the quality of all those things which flow in from beneath by way of the senses and the animus, so that superior mind may call our rational mind into its service in order to inform itself of the things obvious to the senses, lest by chance it be deceived by appearance. For the superior mind well knows how innumerable are the fallacies of things. This is the reason why we are naturally carried away by a certain desire of knowing not only the present but also future things, and not only what is apparent but also what is hidden. For this curiosity is called inborn, and it is the first mover in the perfecting of our intellect. Or it is itself the love of communicating its knowledge to that mind which is to be instructed. In these things that mind does no other action from itself except to turn its rational view to the higher mind or to the soul. Other things spontaneously flow in, the very love exciting the desire of knowing. But from that moment in which the mind applies itself, all this intellect is predicated of the mind as belonging to it. Indeed, the faculty not only of perceiving but of thinking and judging becomes as it were its own, because it is now acquired. But while it is being acquired, the mind itself is as though passive, only turning itself to this or that side. 8. In the formation of the human intellect there occur 4 ages, hardly otherwise than in the great world or the macrocosm. The first or golden age is when the animus is entirely subject to its mind, for then it cannot be called the animus, but the lower or natural mind. The next or silver age is when the animus is not subject to the mind, but reigns with that in equal right. The third, or brazen age, is when the animus begins to fight with its mind and endeavours to cast this down from her throne. The fourth, or iron age, is when the animus subjects to itself the higher mind and makes it her handmaid. These things are perceived in our rational mind from those very loves which rule and command. If they are of the body and of the animus, or of the world, it is a proof that the spiritual loves are driven from their thrones and extinguished. But when the spiritual loves reign, the body loves yield, and as it were become cold, and the lusts of the body are said to be dead. For so far as the things of the body live, those of the spirit vanish away, and vice versa. 9. But a state of integrity would be that wherein the spiritual loves alone reign. Then there would not be any rational mind, but the spiritual mind alone. For there would be no confluence of loves. Consequently, in order to be corporeal, we cannot easily subsist in that state. It would be superhuman and miraculous. But still it is our better life when superior and inferior loves reign equally, and the rational mind is elevated above its body, and is so instructed from itself concerning what it encounters, that it has need of no science as a teacher. We are always inclining to lower things. Thus we are drawn away from this equilibrium, that is, this rationality itself. But if we remained infants, our rational mind would be nothing, or, if something, still not rational, but spiritual. 314. But let us return to the affections or the loves, and inquire whether there are any in the rational mind which may be properly called its own. Yet we cannot make this inquiry without first examining all those desires which appear to be in this mind. From these, then, we shall be able to form a conclusion. End of section 27.